this for a moment just to point something out. And I think this is where, again, you know, in jazz we talk a lot about the importance of the blues. And we talk about how when the blues was born, blues and jazz evolved, and they were evolving and growing parallel, and then their paths started to cross. And it kind of never has stopped since. But they were two different things. I think that a lot can be said about the music world and the art world, and when I listen to that, if I was to transcribe what you just heard so far, I could get a really good elementary school trumpet player to play that. It's not about technique. And I'll be bold enough to say, to give you a musical example, think of punk bands. And I'll be bold enough to say, as a non-artist, think about Satie. You know, it's not always about the technique. And when you hear Miles play there, and trust me, he had the technique. I mean, he could play bebop and fast and make it sound just like the Oscar Peterson that played for you. He could play high, he could play all over the place. He was a creative genius. But he chose to do that. And I think the two ingredients that we share in our community as artists, musicians, I like to think of us all as artists doing the same thing, is these two wonderful things that need to exist for great art to be created, which is the intent that we spoke about, taking that stand that what we're creating will have meaning, but more importantly, emotion, that we will allow our feelings that are really there to be expressed. And I think when you put those two things together, emotion and intent, when you're willing to open up and share about that, I really think that that art voices and communicates powerfully. I don't think it's about technique. Now, that's just my opinion. But again, we stand on the shoulders of giants. The learning is important, the technique is helpful. You know, any of you might be a fan of Chet Baker. You know, I remember talking to one of my teachers about Chet Baker. He had a great quote that I don't think he realized it, but it really taught me a lot. He said, yeah, Chet Baker, he was a crappy trumpet player, but a great musician. You know, and he really was. I mean, he really just, you know, and it probably didn't help that he had his teeth knocked out by a drug dealer, but, you know, it's kind of hard to play the trumpet without teeth. But, you know, he did not have good technique. He really just wasn't a great trumpet player. But man, he was an amazing musician, you know. A great artist can really come from anywhere, you know. So I think it's really kind of cool when we think about that. And I think the one thing we share too, whatever we use as our mode of expression, is emotions are universal. With all that we don't have in common, if we have a heartbeat and we're human beings, we all have emotions. And I think that's why music and art has been such an important part of what we do since the beginning of time. It speaks to us so powerfully. It's pretty hip, it's pretty cool. A good friend of mine said, and I think this kind of speaks to that, he was talking about the blues, and he said the alchemy of the blues is that pain expressed lyrically is both relieved and transformed, often to joy. Think about the connection of anger to rhythm, sadness to melody, and vice versa. Think about how this translates to art, color choice, texture, brush strokes, etc. You know, many of us have studied and created music and art for years, and we're in the habit of listening, and we're in the habit of looking and viewing analytically. But quite often, I think we try to discern color or texture, or in the case of music, it might be harmony or rhythm or technique, but we should remember to listen to music and look at art from an emotional point of view. I think that's really important. You know, when we were young, our attention was on the feeling. I always tell my students, you know, it's like, don't forget the play. Don't forget the playfulness in music. You know, when you're a kid, your dad or mom didn't need to say to you when they brought to you when you were at a park 4 years old, like, okay, Johnny, so we're going to play now. This is what you're going to do. Laugh, and then make some stuff up, and then go introduce yourself to that kid, and then run around. And, you know, kids, what do? Hey, how are you? Let's go. Okay. So here's how the game goes. And there's 9 million rules. How do you remember? I have no idea. I'm always amazed with my kids, right? And you go here, and then you have to touch that, and that's 5 points, and that's 3 points. recordings. And then you go there and you do this, okay, yeah, right. There's 9 million kids all doing this and they remember it somehow, you know. But as adults, we'll stand in line and we won't even like talk to anybody. Or we'll be at an art thing, we'll be looking at the same piece of art, and I won't turn to him and go, holy cow, isn't that gorgeous? You know, hey, I'm Tom, what's happening? Isn't this so cool? Look at that dude. He looks like one of me, you know what? Yeah, right, you know. So the emotion is pretty good.
I'm running out of albums. That means we're coming to the end.
Yeah. Here's one that I love. So this guy was so inspired by his relationship with artists and doing this. Pee Wee Russell, he was a great clarinet player. And he actually started painting, inspired by the artists that he was working with producing his albums. And then finally one of the producers was like, hey man, I heard you're painting. And he was like, oh no, I'm not a painter, I'm a musician, you know, the critic inside, right? You know, I'm not a painter, I play clarinet, you know. And they finally convinced him to put one of his paintings on an album cover. So this is a Pee Wee Russell album, and it has Pee Wee's work on it. And I love the picture on the back because it's Pee Wee's house. And they took that picture there, and you can see the artwork he had on his walls, kind of inspired what he was doing, which is kind of good. Yeah. So, at this point, like I would say to my students, I feel like I have talked way too much. So I would love your thoughts, feelings, complaints, which will be forwarded to Kevin. Questions? Maybe we can get a little dialogue. Yeah.
Well, it was funny, years ago when Pee Wee Herman came out with Pee Wee's Playhouse, I just figured, I got confused, I thought it was Pee Wee Russell. And I watched months that show, and I couldn't get anything. And you never forget.
Yeah.
And you know, finally, on a serious note, I was digging a comment about Jackson Pollock's art, and there's kind of a funny local story to that. Obviously, everybody knows about his house in East Hampton in Springs. It's now a study center and so on. And it's a wonderful place to go to if anybody hasn't been there. And one time, a number of years ago, there was they had a day dedicated to Jackson Pollock, Lee Krasner, and the music that they listened to. And inevitably, as you can imagine, I found my way there that day. And they had a guest performance by the duo Dwight Mitchell and you remember them? Piano and bass. Ruff, Mitchell and Ruff.
Okay.
And they played outdoors, playing music inspired by Jackson Pollock. And amazingly, they had Jackson Pollock's record collection, apparently intact, in the living room, under the old record player, just waiting for somebody to come and look at it, which I did. And to my surprise and frankly disappointment, it was cornball. And it was only about 20 albums there. And it was corny jive. And the question is, and yes, there is a question, I figured there had to be albums missing, because there's no way Jackson Pollock had 20 corny albums. Yeah. So I have a feeling somebody got there before I did and made off with them. I'm curious what albums you found there when you were there.
Well, I was told by David Aaron, who was